I read in the Harvard Business Review about the importance of a certain type of diversity. What they were stating is that it's very important to have real diversity, to take people from different backgrounds and to place them in a team together. That this type of diversity would often be difficult for the members of the team because what it created was a degree of conflict. So you might get someone who might be a Catholic, and you might get someone who might be a Jew or a Muslim, or you might get someone who is white and from a certain background, and someone who's black from a certain other background, and put them all in the team together. And they'd have very different worldviews, and therefore would be able to see a lot of things coming that a team with only one worldview would have. What companies instead often have done with diversity is to make sure that everyone has the same worldview, while having people wear almost like people wearing masks, that it's the same worldview, it's the same underlying belief system, but people just look different. And so it's diversity, but it's not the very important type of diversity which is a great strength for a society, which is viewpoint diversity, which is having people from different backgrounds who all engage together against the same problem and often will have great fights about it. There's a deep danger involved where we don't have different viewpoints, different ways of seeing things. One particularly dangerous way of hiding behind a single viewpoint is to say we must always follow science. Problem is that science, and anyone who's been involved with courtrooms or who understand the law of evidence, is a process. It's not a consensus of views. If you want to have an expert give evidence, you generally want them to tell you what type of processes they underwent to come to a certain opinion. They're not just there to spout all facts. They're there to say, I did this and this and this, and the result was that, or someone else did these specific things. One of the great problems we have in the sciences currently is that a lot of science which has been settled, when investigated by teams later to see if the results could be reproduced, the results could not be reproduced. And so the science which was settled was actually false science, or at least not verifiable science. And we are increasingly finding that what we believe to be correct in science is not really as foundational or concrete as we thought it was, because often what can be reproduced is not necessarily what's wanted to be reproduced. For instance, some of the most reproducible science is on stereotype and its accuracy. And it's generally found that stereotypes are quite accurate. But, and this is quite important, that when we actually experience a real human being, that's more accurate than our stereotypes. Unfortunately, the human mind, generally speaking, will encounter that human being and either change the stereotype or at least understand that it doesn't apply to them. Now, stereotypes can be very dangerous. They can create a situation where people are discriminated against in such a way that you don't get that viewpoint diversity from people from different backgrounds, and so you can't see what the threats to the future are as well, because you don't have as many eyes to actually look out for them. You simply have one set of eyes if everyone looks at the world the same way. When it comes to COVID-19, you often hear that the virus has caused all of these job losses or has caused damage to the economy. I'll now read one example of a tweet by an ITV reporter. Paul Brand states, those shocking stats in summary: GDP to shrink 11.3% this year, biggest fall in 300 years, borrowing to reach 294 billion, most in peacetime, unemployment to hit 7.5% next year, 2.6 million jobless. The government will be dogged by the economic damage COVID-19 has wreaked. So it's COVID-19 which has wreaked it, we are told. And yet it's not COVID-19 which implemented the exact responses to COVID-19 which have caused these economic impacts. The borrowing, for instance, is certainly a government action. The choice to borrow money in order to give that money to people who are affected by the virus. The choice to lock down economies, the choice of how much to lock down economies, what exact measures to put in place. It's very important that we view our politicians not as people who we want to blindly follow science. Science doesn't exist in the sense of anything which can tell you what to do. Science just consists of experimenting and finding experiments that you can reproduce. That's science. You can't even say that politicians must follow and do what people want them to do, because as we periodically see with our elections, what polling companies find people want and believe is not what their voting habits show that they want and believe. What we need is politicians who will act trustworthily once in office and who we can hold accountable for their individual decisions. But to do that, we as citizens and the media as well need to take a different approach to our politicians. We can't say that COVID has done this and that and the other thing when we know that it was our politicians who did such things. Now, is it right? Is it wrong? Did Boris make the right decisions or the wrong ones? I don't know. But I do know that it was his decisions, not COVID, which caused the economy to contract in the manner it did. And if his decisions were worse decisions, the economy might have contracted worse. And if there were better decisions, it might have contracted less. You might also have had some more lives saved from the current virus, which is gaining headlines. Though the question is, do we take the same approach to other viruses, to other problems, which also could have lives saved? Or do we treat them as not such a priority as COVID-19? Ultimately, what needs to be done is we need to follow an approach where our politicians are held accountable for their actions, where we can't simply say they must follow the science or what the media says or what the experts say, because quite often the experts are wrong. And quite often in science in particular, we have a situation where certain ideologies become prevalent in certain sciences, and those ideologies then govern the sciences. But then it's not reproducible experiments. It's not science, classically speaking. It's a situation where certain results are not acceptable, where we currently have scientific journals unpublishing work, not because it's incorrect or didn't follow the right processes, but because the results are unpalatable to some. And if we have politicians, people who have extreme power, saying they're following science when they're not following science, but an ideology which is governing science in a certain sector of society, then we need to be incredibly careful, because we're no longer then electing leaders who are treating themselves as having agency, treating themselves as making their own decisions. We're then outsourcing those decisions to people who are not accountable for the impact of those decisions. People often who have tenure at universities, and who, if they make the wrong decisions, are not going to face the consequences of it. So it's incredibly important, firstly, that we have viewpoint diversity, that we not have this perception that a viewpoint cannot be accepted because it's not accepted by the ideology governing the majority of sciences at the moment. If we did that, we'd know nothing about stereotypes, because that type of research was initially subdued, and even today will be repressed to a degree. But we need to have a situation where our politicians are accountable and make their own decisions based on the facts before them, and not based on what so-called experts say, but based on a plethora of views from different people, from different expertise, and putting their own guns against the issue, not someone else's. Putting their own mind to the issue, not someone else's. Because if we have a situation where no matter who our politicians are, they follow certain think tanks and certain scientists, we no longer have democracies, not in the true sense of the word. Then we have a situation where an aristocracy governs us, whether it's the media or certain types of scientists. It's unpalatable and it's dangerous.